Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Conversations on Conversations, where each week we explore a topic to help us have more powerful conversations with ourselves and others. I'm your host, Sarah Noll Wilson, and joining me today is my new friend, Tiana Sanchez, who I had the privilege of watching her keynote talking about how we can rethink leadership. And I was so excited that she said yes to coming on the show. So let me tell you a little bit about Tiana before we jump into our conversation. Tiana Sanchez is the CEO and founder of TSI LLC, a woman-owned small business. She brings over a decade of experience as a corporate trainer and business consultant to leaders in the public and private sectors. As a #1 best-selling author and a globally recognized podcast host, Tiana has earned acclaim for her insights. She's an award-winning executive coach. She utilizes her diverse management background in retail, food and beverage, and finance to elevate people development. Her program, Milestone, was named Best Executive Coaching Program by HR.com. Tiana specializes in delivering world-class leadership programs, keynotes, and seminars. Her tailored diversity audits and pulse surveys empower organizations with equitable practices, showcased through partnerships with renowned entities like Sony Pictures Entertainment, Sempra, and the Metropolitan Water District. Tiana's impactful workshops at esteemed educational institutions underscore her commitment to elevating organizational effectiveness. Armed with a psychology and business management background, Tiana is a sought-after speaker, contributing author, and dedicated advocate for sustainable leadership development. Tiana, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. That was quite a welcome. I appreciate it. Glad to be here.
I'm so excited. And what's unique about this is that normally I have some type of relationship with someone. So you and I are going to get to know each other, but I'll just get to tell everyone why I invited you on the show and why I'm so excited to be in conversation. Like I said, I had a privilege of seeing you speak, and there are so many ways that you spoke to the realities of what we were facing. And, from the idea of how do we create more community-centered, how do we think about leadership from a civility perspective, all of that. But before we get into that, I'm jumping the gun because I'm really excited to have you. Tiana, what else do you want us to know about you?
Oh my gosh. I'll start off with a fun fact. I'm an ex-hot dogger, and your listeners are probably like, what the heck is an ex-hot dogger? Yeah. So I used to work at a gourmet fast food restaurant, which would probably be the equivalent to like an In-N-Out if you have that. But instead of burgers, it is corn dogs.
Yes.
And I started there when I was 16 years old. And I started managing. That was my first opportunity to become a manager at 17 years old. And it was predominantly ran by women. So it was my first introduction to female leadership. And I worked there for about almost 8 years.
Wow.
And had just a wealth of knowledge and experience. And that, many people don't know, really helped, I believe, build and lead the trajectory of my career and where I am today with that early onset experience of a women-led organization.
Okay, I have so many questions. First, I just have to say, I knew I liked you and now I love you. I love corn dogs and I love that this is part of your story. Now, were they hand dipped or were they frozen? Like what kind of, are we talking real hand dipped?
We are talking, Sarah, real. Like I can't even tell you the recipe because I'm bound by secrecy, but it was an old family recipe from our founder. And it was like a cornmeal, but it had all these ingredients. And then coupled with that, we had fresh lemonade. And there was a very unique way that we made lemonade. And it became like the brand, the staple over, years. I want to say it's 75 plus years old now.
Wow.
So no, these were very fresh. And I remember years later, after I became an entrepreneur and I completely left that job, like years later, I went back to a location. They were celebrating like one of the anniversaries. And I was like, hey, I used to work here. Can I come back there and dip a hot dog? And they let me. And it was so cool because I thought I was a little rusty, but when you just pick it. It's like a bite.
Yeah, you just right back into
right
it.
back up.
Okay.
Yes, and it was fun.
This is not a critical question for our audience, but I'm so curious. Do you have strong opinions, or do you only eat those corn dogs? Like, have you like, did you have your fill of them, or you're like, I have opinions about what makes a good corn dog? Because there is such a thing as a good corn dog and not a good corn dog. I had no idea that I love it.
Oh no, it's a science. It's it definitely do not like frozen. And there definitely was the circumference. Let me get scientific. The circumference of the batter around the hot dog is extremely important. You don't want it too thick, because it won't cook all the way through, right? And it's too bready, but you don't want it too thin. You got to have that right balance. So no, it's definitely. And now I'm plant-based, so I definitely eat more of the plant-based hot dogs if they're available, and they are actually. Yeah. So yeah. But there is a science.
Okay, so knowing that you were working at such a young age in what is a really intense industry. I mean, any kind of food industry has very unique challenges. What were some of the key lessons that you pulled from that time, particularly from the leaders that you had the privilege of working under?
The women leaders that I worked under were, the environment was very family oriented. It was only my second job when I had started working there. And so I certainly didn't realize that I was an anomaly coming into an environment that was predominantly women led. I saw people of color. I saw people rise to levels of leadership and then get promoted and so forth. And didn't realize that really wasn't the case outside of this environment. But it was also very much like in the mall. Like, I'm a Gen Xer, and we grew up, heading to the malls. That was your place. That's where you went after school. That's where you went on the weekends. And so the foot traffic in that environment at that time was very high. And so it wouldn't be till years later, as internet, online spending, the decrease of foot traffic in malls would start to impact how these kind of small restaurant chains would sustain themselves. But I certainly learned early on about management, about women in leadership positions, balancing P&L statements, and really being in a family environment.
Yeah. What was that transition like when you moved out of that and realized that's not how so many other industries operate?
Oh, reality check hit me pretty quickly. I do believe, though, I'm a pretty assertive individual, and I even though it was a reality check, I just couldn't accept that wasn't going to be the way. Like, I was introduced. That was almost like how you were born and raised, right? How you were born and raised, it's hard to change those ideals because that's what you were born into. And I was raised in an environment that celebrated women, that celebrated people of color, that celebrated that rise to leadership. There was no limitation. The sky was the limit. And when I left, and especially when I landed in the financial industry, it was rough because there was these types of, I don't want to say cliques, but there were certainly methods of leadership factions, styles. Yes, that I wasn't accustomed to. And even though I rose in that environment as well, it definitely didn't feel the same. It felt forced in some ways. It felt like there was definitely a struggle where the other environment felt like I was supported, I was valued. This one didn't always feel like that. Yeah.
It's, we just had a really fantastic interview with a woman. Her name's Shantae Gordon. And one of the things we were talking about was just her transition of moving from Miami, where she was exposed to so much diversity and coming from a Caribbean background, to then going to Northwestern in Chicago, and this having to figure out who she was in the system that wasn't made for her. Right. And this, and that struggle. And that is something that when you're part of that like dominant group, you don't realize the cost, the effort, the consciousness, the assimilation, the choice of assimilation or not that people go through. So talk to me about what was your journey then to doing the work you're doing now. So it's clear, just in talking with you, you're a very reflective person. You're paying attention to things. You're noticing patterns. What was your journey to the work you're doing now?
It started early, right? Started at the 16, 17 when I worked at Hot Dog on a Stick. which is the name of the company, by the way. I don't think I ever gave it. It was
we got to give it a name.
Yes, Hot Dog on a Stick. My career really took off, Sarah, when I was working in the financial industry. So I started right on the heels. It was like 2004, right? And then a few years later, you had the financial crisis, 2006, 7, 8, all of that wonderful good times, right? Mm-hmm. And I worked at a credit union, and that was one of the companies. I kind of rose up in the ranks, started off as a branch manager, and then became a regional manager, and then became part of the putting together debriefs for our executive team and board. And at that time, the company started to change, right? Because people were moving away from home loans and companies were falling. And this company decided to go a different path, which was auto loans. Well, nobody knew how to do auto loans at that time. And it felt like we were being set up to fail in a sense. And the culture at the time just kind of came a little toxic. It felt very high schoolish. Yeah. There were these, again, you talk about factions, like, clickiness, and just didn't feel that level of support. And I ended up being one of the three. I rose to a regional manager position, and I became laid off. And it was interesting because I had just come back from maternity leave. And I think had I picked up my phone, because I was getting a call before I was getting on maternity leave. This is a whole sidebar conversation. But a colleague of mine who was also a regional manager had called and said, hey, they're calling me and I just got laid off. If they call, don't answer the phone. and I was like, oh, okay. And it kind of, delayed, I think, what would be the inevitable. And I can't say for certain that was what's going to happen to me, obviously. Yeah. But that was the environment that I was in. And so when I came back, got the notice, and I was like, well, what have I been doing this whole time? Do I want to go back into work, or do I want to start my own business? Equipped with no degree, Sarah, no experience of starting a business. But 90 days later, in May 2011, I started my business on the heels of being laid off.
Wow. One of the things congratulations. And it's such a feat right? We know most small businesses don't last past 3 years. So the fact that you're, coming up on 15 years is fantastic.
Thank you.
13, 14 years. Yeah, you'll be coming up. But still, that's amazing. One of the things you said in your speech, just speaking of that, let's talk about how you talk about culture. One of the ways you described how a company normally approaches culture, I thought was so magnificent and brilliant. And you described it as so often companies are creating a culture, thinking of it in terms of almost like Jenga, right? And so the goal is to get as high as you can. But in order to get as high as you can, you're sacrificing stability, so you're constantly pulling from the bottom. And I would love to just hear you speak more to that. And you can say it much more eloquently. And then what you proposed was, how do we think about creating culture from a Lego perspective? So I definitely I want people to hear how you talk about this, because I found myself just going like, oh man, that is so spot on. And because when we're constantly just trying, how do we get better? How do we get bigger? How do we get taller? There's usually a serious cost to that.
Yes, you actually described it very beautifully. So that tells me you were paying attention and it resonated with you.
As soon as you said it, I was like, I got to write this down. I can't forget this.
And I think for many of us, it was like a light bulb moment that just really made sense and clicked. We traditionally have a shareholder capitalistic society where the goal is short-term, quick, easy. Let's just make that money, satisfy the shareholders, and that's it. And it's not really a long-term strategy. It's quick fix. It's grow fast, grow high. And as I was thinking about this culture and having worked since I was 16 years old, and now I'm in my late 40s, I've seen a lot of different cultures. And most recently, just thinking of the last 4 years now coming on the heels of the pandemic and civil unrest and companies making commitments to do certain things, but we now realize maybe they were making those commitments out of convenience as opposed to commitment. Yeah. And so it was like, yes, we're going to do this. And then, oh no, we're not anymore. And we're taking things away. And it just reminded me of a Jenga model. I have kids, I have boys, and actually in front of me is our Jenga set. And we've played it, and everyone probably listening has played this game. You build up the blocks and you gingerly take the pieces from the bottom and you build and you grow. And it just really reminded me of how we do approach our businesses. Is it's about growing fast, growing high, getting as big as you can get, stacking, right? Just stacking. And then, you're pulling from the foundation. When we say pull from the bottom, I don't mean bottom is bad. I mean, bottom is your foundation. Those are your people. Those are the things that your vision, your mission, your core values that you've stood on. And now you're compromising. You're saying, oh, do we really need that in our program to support our core values? Or do we really need that, that position and that role? Do we really need this kind of training? And so we're compromising and constantly taking from the bottom just to grow high and grow tall. And we all know what happens in Jenga, right? You keep pulling from the bottom or near the bottom, you create a shaky, unstable ground. And eventually it will topple. And that's what happens in the Jenga model, right? So that was the impetus for that example.
I love that visual so much, because the other thing that had come up for me as I was reflecting on that imagery is not only are there gaps in your foundation, but now you're asking things to carry more burden to sustain it. And whether that is, it's obviously people, but it's usually people who maybe have been there a while, who are doing jobs that are underpaid and underappreciated. And now there's just so much more weight being carried by such fewer people and fewer things. And so I thought that was it was just such an effective visual. And related to that, then you offered the perspective of how do we think of it less like Jenga and more like Legos? So say more about that.
Yes. Legos to me represents creativity. It represents limitless ideas. It represents a collective of individuals that support a common objective or goal. And I again grew up in an age where you play with Legos, again, have kids that play with both. And
you stepped on the Legos.
I stepped on the Legos and you were like, thought you're going to die. Because those things cut in your feet. And I really, what sold it for me, I happened to be flipping through social media and it was May the 4th, right? And it's Star Wars, May the 4th be with you. And I saw this illustration at Disneyland. They were hosting a Star Wars kind of mural. And they had all of these those little Lego pieces, Sarah, that you just mentioned, they had numbers on them. They had this huge mural. And each person that would come by the area, they would be given this Lego with a number and they would place it on the mural. This was a massive mural. So you have to imagine like hundreds of people went by there over a period of a day or two to put this mural together. And I was like, wow, isn't that just beautiful? Like a collective effort of different people coming together to create this beautiful mural. And then I started looking at, wow, I know there's like some really cool other illustrations that Lego has created. And I started looking at, and I'm like, it just reminds me, because there's a ton of resources that you have to use, people, hours dedicated. And I don't know about you, but the color, size, and shape of Legos are all different.
Yeah.
Right. And you can rearrange them. They can create new things. And I just started thinking again about how that process, as opposed to growing tall and high, it's about breadth. It's about growing wide and reaching further. And collectively, everyone thrives. It's not just about growing high and growing tall. And so when I think of Legos, again, I think of that level of creativity and massive breadth that we have to expand our culture and our people collectively in that environment.
Yeah. And that was something that you spoke to, which was just this, humans have this unlimited imagination. And, one of the things you said, obviously there was a lot that you said that really resonated for me, but one of the things that you said in your speech was, we're so willing to sacrifice our humanity for the dollar. And we're so willing. And one of the things that I've shared this with a number of people, and I've shared this even in conversations, I've quoted you in conversations with some of our clients is, and when you are a company, that said, we value this, or we're committed to X, Y, and Z. We're committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion. We are committed to taking care of our team members. We are committed to, and when you back away from that, to your point, because now it feels inconvenient, I'll never forget. I think I threw down my pen when you said this. You're like, people feel conned because, and that I've never heard it summed up that way. That when you espouse values, when you espouse something you are willing to commit to, and it's so easy for you to back away from, whether people are conscious of it or not, they feel conned, or at the very minimum go, so what do you actually believe? Or where else are you not being honest with me? And I would love to hear more about that from your perspective. Because the word conned was so provocative for me. And I was like, damn, that is how a lot of people feel for a number of reasons. Like, well, you say you value this, but you keep behaving in this way. So I don't know who you are now, or I don't know if I can trust you.
That you, again, beautifully said and restated. And it was really how I was feeling. And
Yeah.
I imagine a lot of people were feeling, especially through conversations that I was having. But really, Sarah, it came from how I was truly feeling, because we were hopeful. And, a few years ago, and we were like, okay, people are doing the right things for the right reasons. And yes, we're making these commitments. And there was this kind of little tiny voice in the back of your head. It's like, I hope they're not just checking boxes. I hope this is really a commitment and they're not just trying to show face and they're not. But I was like, okay, silence that negativity, silence that voice. I was telling myself, and it's like, no, there are people that are really dedicated and committed to this, and they want to do what's right. And then you started seeing this kind of decline, this deprioritization. You started hearing programs and people's positions being eliminated. And then the budget started to get cut. And it was not only me, Sarah, it was me. I remember a couple of my other colleagues that operate in this space, we saw a significant decline with the type of programs that people were wanting to do. And it was just felt across a lot of different industries and positions. And it felt like, okay, so were you really about it, or were you just trying to say that you were? And again, feeling that con, and it's another C word. We talk about, I use this kind of word, this new C-suite, but I use C in many different ways. I talk about culture and change and consciousness and crises. And I kind of use that to piggyback and make these points. And we often operate out of crisis. And I challenge folks, and as I did in that talk, it's like, instead of operating out of crisis, we need to operate out of civility, using a civil-led mindset.
So all right. I do need it's a missed opportunity if I don't hear your perspective, because the timing of this conversation, for people who are listening, because this will air later, just this last week, SHRM, which is the National Organization for HR, just put out this big announcement that they were removing equity as part of one of the main pillars. And you could see, right? I mean, I'm just going to speak from my opinion. Not surprised, because of the direction that organization had been going in. But that idea of just feeling conned, or feeling who are you actually supporting? Who are you protecting? Who are you advocating for? And just, for context, for people who may be unfamiliar with it, the reason that they gave for removing equity wasn't based on any data. It was based on the fact that there was, and I quote, societal backlash and polarization by the use of it. That was one of the reasonings they gave, which I continue to state my opinion online about this. There was always societal backlash. It just wasn't by the people who are in power. And there was always polarization from the haves and the have-nots, and who has access. So, I mean, anyway, that's just my personal opinion on that.
Right.
But we're in the midst of the continuing to shrink and shirk our responsibility for taking care of people and making sure that people have access. So I'm just curious to get your thoughts on that. And then I want to get into your model of civility, because I want to make a connection to how Sherman's talking about it.
Being right oftentimes means being unpopular, or doing the right thing often means being unpopular. You have to stand on principle and not stand on popularity. So with that, there are going to be decisions as leaders that we have to make and causes that we have to stand by that honestly, we're going to receive some resistance. We're going to see some hateration. If you always stand on principle and you do what's right for the right reasons, and you're taking care of your people and you're having their back and you're leading with integrity and humanity, then in my opinion, you will outlast the hateration and those, because oftentimes it's a season. Yeah. It's a season. Yeah. It's a moment in time. It's it's trendy now. But it's the people that can withstand this level of resistance, this level of backlash, that really become those great leaders that we remember, that we talk about. Yeah. And for people that are flip-floppy or, wishy-washy and then just don't stand, or just kind of are caving in my opinion, to, again, societal demands. And they're not necessarily leading by humanity. And what's tough, Sarah, is a part of me thinks that they're doing what's right. Yeah. Like, I think there's a part of them that thinks that they've been convinced that nope, let's take that E out. I feel like it is a little this, that, and the other. And that outside external influence has shifted them in a negative way to thinking that it's the right thing to do. But in my opinion, it's not always the case.
Yeah, it's again, when you think about creating a culture of trust, when you think about creating a culture of safety, that consistency becomes really important. As you were talking, I was thinking, there's organizations I don't necessarily agree with their principles, but I always know where they stand. I might not like it. I might not agree with it, but, and when you think about the impact that has on the customers you serve or the team members who are part of it, when you're constantly shifting, and that's not to say that there isn't iteration and there isn't evolution. There should be when it comes to that, but when it feels like the principles are held way too lightly, right? There's a real cost to that in ways that I think organizations don't always see or understand. My colleague and friend Brandon Springle, he'll often talk about how so many organizations have identity crisis, because it's like, this is who they say they are, and then this is how they're actually behaving, and then people are left with like, well, who are you? And it can be an act of courage to stand on your principles and to fight for what's right.
Yes, I remember when people were making statements online about where they stood early in 2020, or putting banners up on websites and making sure they had the right images displayed. Yeah, and I remember back then saying that you show up when no one's looking. Yeah. When I shouldn't have to have a sign across my forehead that says I believe in diversity, equity, inclusion, or, constantly have to tell everybody that I meet. It's weaved into my DNA. It is about who I am, what we represent. It's everywhere. It's when you walk into the office, it's how we greet people. It's how we converse and interact. I shouldn't have to display it just to, again, show everyone outside. And so you show up when no one is looking. It's like when you go in the bathroom, and this is probably totally off topic, but
I love it. Let's do it.
I will find myself, in the restroom, and I'll see like a paper towel that has been tossed on the floor. Yeah. I'm that person. I will pick it up and throw it in the trash. I'll grab, something, pick it up. No one's there. No one sees me, but that's just who I am. I know in my house, I don't like leaving things disorganized. So I'm going somewhere else. Oh, why not just pick this little thing up? Or something like that. So it's who you are when no one is looking. But the problem is too many people are looking right now, Sarah.
Yeah.
Everybody is looking on social media. So everything is done in the public eye.
Yeah.
There seldom is that opportunity, I think, for people to just truly, be who they are, and without having to feel like there's eyes and I have to do it this way.
Yeah.
So it's where we are.
I mean, that's part of the being intentional and being conscious of it is, that's something that I was working with a coach. Well, still I'm working with her and she's fantastic. She'll listen to this. So Stephanie, hi.
Hi, Stephanie.
She's always like, I heard your shout out. No, but one of the things she pushed me on early on was, are you doing this because you want to make a difference? Or are you doing it because you want to be seen as a good white person? And I was just like, oh, mother, darn it.
Wow.
Yeah, you're right. And when it comes to your principles and your values and again, going back to culture and that foundation, it should be seen. It should be experienced. Just like you said, like, don't tell me who you are, show me who you are, right? How you treat, your customer care reps, how you talk about them tells me more about your culture than some banner that you have hung stating your values. So as you, and again, one of the things I appreciate is that you are putting forth a vision of how do we think about leadership differently? And you use the word civility, but sometimes that word civility I see becomes weaponized from the standpoint of, people will say things like, well, we can have a tough conversation. We can disagree as long as it's civil. We can disagree as long as it's respectful. And the question I always ask people is like, well, who gets to decide what is civil, what is respectful? But you painted a very different picture of civility. So let's hear all about your leadership philosophy.
Yes. When I say we, as I have researched this with a host of individuals and team to kind of help bring this together. When I thought of civility, I was thinking of it from the humanness lens, our responsibility, our ethical leadership practices, our civil responsibilities, how we not only engage and interact with other people, but if you thrive, I thrive. If I thrive, you thrive. And I used kind of the example of a garden, if you remember in that talk. And when I think of a garden, it's living, it's breathing, it's an organism. And it's not a machine. It's not driven by that, automation necessarily, but everything is thriving and living from the roots of the tree that go deep, the foundation, to the branches, to the, the flowers, the different types. And, you have the sunlight. So kind of everything is working together. And it's, again, the breadth of everything. We're supporting each other. So the civility is not only, again, just humanist, but it's us working together. And we identify kind of three lanes of this civilly led mindset, if you will, where we talk about collective social responsibility. We talk about creative synthesis. And I should say creative synthesis. And to your point, we talk about weaponizing words. I wanted to bring people into the conversation and not turn them away because the terminology D&I was becoming weaponized. And so a unique way, creative synthesis is another way of bringing that to the surface, hopefully calling people in and not turning, them away. But we were talking about that creative synthesis, collective social responsibility, and this idea of, I'm going to use servant leadership. I refer to as something different, but servant leadership to me really speaks to a palms down as opposed to palms up. Palms up is give me, give me, give me. Palms down or out is like, I'm here to serve. And it just brings about a whole different level of understanding and perspective when we approach things in that way. So again, I'm providing just enough to pique interest. I want people to really dive into more of this. So I'm giving just enough, just a little sneak peeks of insight.
Well, and I, again, this has been a theme in some of our conversations of that idea of our, to use your word, humaneness, like that our commitment to each other. And again, it's just because of the timing of when we're recording, because I just wrapped with Shantae a half an hour ago, we were talking about how do we, she described community so beautifully. She's like, it's not a noun, it's a verb, it's an action. And so I'm curious to know.
Love that.
Yeah, I love that, because I think of, when I think of relationships, I think of them in the same way. Like to be to relationship is an act, right? To be in relationship is a choice. Who, maybe not the question who, but what are examples that you've observed or experienced of what this looks like done really well in practice? Because one of the things that we have observed in our work with organizations is, and this is not just organizations, this has also been true of individuals and relationships. When you've never experienced what could be possible, if you never experienced what it feels like to be in a truly safe relationship where I can give you feedback and you'll be curious with it, and we can wrestle with the hard stuff, and we'll both be better for it. Similarly, I think we've gotten so good, particularly, and again, we have a global audience, so I'm just going to speak to American culture. A lot of us have become so good at tolerating whatever level of culture, right? Positive environment, healthy environment, that so many people have never experienced it. So it's hard to know how to create it. So what are some examples that you've seen of it done really, really well?
Well, one of the first examples, and I talked about it in the talk, and it's actually an example that I give, one of the examples in the book, is when I heard about the organization Patagonia. Now, I have to qualify that. I don't work for them. I don't get paid to mention their name. There's no tie whatsoever. I just remember being in the audience listening to a speaker talk about this company and everything that they did there. And everything that I was listening to, I was like, they do that there? Like, I've never heard of that. People can take a break during the middle of the day. There's childcare for new parents. You can bring dogs to work, and then they supported your cause. And those are just a few things. And I was literally in the audience just floored. I said, and I'm looking around like, is anybody else like thinking this is strange?
Yeah.
And then it just sent me on this journey of wanting to understand what it is that they did that other companies at the time, to my knowledge, weren't really doing.
Yeah.
And so I learned a little bit more about their culture. I learned a little bit more about this assessment that they did. It's called a certified B corporation, which is also something that I talk about.
Yeah.
Which I had never heard about, but there is a rigorous process to becoming a certified B corporation. And you have to meet these kind of areas that they focus on, which we talk about in more depth. And that was really kind of the start of like, this is a company that has a culture that really values its people, that believes in causes, that believes in the well-being, to not just saying, hey, we believe in well-being, but, oh, go ahead, take the afternoon off kind of thing. Oh, we believe in philanthropy, but no, take whatever cause, we're going to match it. Yep. And we've done it. Like, they're putting their money where their mouth is. Yeah. And it was just a novel thing at the time. And to date, this B Corp status, we have 6 to 7 million companies in the United States.
Right. You shared that
stat. I think there's a 80% or something that have less than 100 employees. But the point being, there's only 2,300 certified B corporations out of 6 to 7 million. And which presents to me a huge opportunity. A, do people know about this? B, are they willing if they do know? Because it is a rigorous process. But it's, again, I'm putting my money where my mouth is, and I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do for the right reasons. And it tells us what you really stand for. And it's not blatant. And you might have a little certified B on the corner of your website, but it's not like, hey, I'm a certified B. Again, it's who you are when no one's looking. You know you have this certified B. Your employees know because of how you treat them, but it's not a flashy, title. It's something you do in the background. but it presents a huge opportunity. So, and there's, again, a ton of companies. I just found my new favorite company. Haven't shopped there yet, Sarah, but I'm going to. And they're a certified B clothing line that I found online, because I also talk about
what's their name?
I can't even tell you that I remember the name. I think it's,
okay.
Oh no, I do. I think it's Cezanne. Cezanne. Isn't that beautiful? Like it's
yeah,
Cezanne.
it's really beautiful.
And I stumbled across, because I Google all the time looking for small-owned businesses and to reduce my carbon footprint, which I also talk a lot about. But it's a commitment that I make personally as an individual to make these changes and shifts to support small-owned, to support certified B corporations. As a company, as a leader, why can't you do the same?
Yeah.
You can. It just takes a commitment.
Well, and what I love about the Patagonia example is, I mean, that's a global brand. That is a brand that has been around a while. It is massive, because sometimes I think there's a sense of, we can't do that because it's small, or people will be like, well, it's easy because you're small, Sarah, so you can do that kind of stuff. And it's like, and on some level, it like the decisions we make, because we're trying so hard to create a different kind of company, it also costs us more because we don't have the bandwidth, right? I don't have a staff of 100. And so I'm like, but the risk is actually higher for us when you're smaller, to give people time away, to be able to let them really prioritize their whole life, to not expect them to be working full time. And the thing that will always just, I don't know, push me and also frustrate me is when you take care of people, when you genuinely take care of them, they take care of the company. I mean, it's just like, it's when people are respected, when they have access to resources, when they feel truly heard and listened to. It's, whenever, it's like, I've become a little snarky, I would say, when people will say things like, well, people just don't want to work. I was like, maybe they just don't want to work for you. I don't know. I was like, if I posted something, we would get a ton of applications, because people are craving connection. They're craving being valued. They're craving being appreciated. And it feels so obvious that is a competitive advantage right now.
It is.
But it's hard because we're in a
obvious.
capitalist society,
Mm-hmm. And it's not changed. This isn't new. I don't think what I'm sharing is new, maybe presenting it in a new way. But there are people that have done studies and research for years that have talked about, I know Josh Bersin, who's someone that I really like. He talked about the irresistible, I think it was workplace or environment. And in there, before remote work was even a thing, he wrote about it 10 years ago or something. And he was like, people want flexibility. Well, hello. Everybody kept saying we can't do remote work. We can't be flexible. And then COVID comes, and all of a sudden we're remote first environments. We can figure it out when we have to. Right. And so again, feeling conned a little bit. And it's like, no, we can do these things. So it's not new. We just presenting it information in maybe a new, better, different way for the times that we're in. When this airs, not sure where we will be. This is an election year. It's evergreen. This will be a topic they'll probably listen to after the election. I'm sure that there's some relevance to this conversation that we're having today as people think about the upcoming election, no matter where you sit. But these are the questions and things that we play. So again, the timeliness of this topic, given where we are as a country and as, just as a planet, I think may resonate with people differently than what it has done before. This is not new. Just like what we experienced in early 2020 was not new. It was just in a different context where people received it. And we have the younger generation who are very vocal, very eager to express themselves, and they don't shy away. They kind of keep us all accountable, don't they? So, I think they have
access to information and access to platforms in a way that honestly, not that, long ago didn't exist, and they're using it, and I'm here for all of it. Tiana, it's been such a treat, and I want to be thoughtful of your time. So because you're a new guest and it's the first time you've been on the show, although I suspect we'll have you back, if you'll have us,
Would
especially
love to.
once your book launches. The question we ask everyone the first time, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, is what was a conversation you've had with yourself or someone else that was transformative for you?
When I was working in the financial industry, I met a real estate millionaire, first millionaire I'd ever met. And he imparted some advice to me when I told him I was going to be stepping out on my own, doing my own business. And he said these three things. He said, know when to suit up, show up, and shut up. And it was just like the best advice that I could ever get at that time, because to me, it just said, know when to suit up, like be presentable, be at your best, show up, be on time, bring, the entirety of who you are, and know when to shut up. It's like know when to listen. And I think we talked about that today, just in the conversation of learning to listen to our employees. That to me has stuck with me for the last, I guess, almost 15 years. It's been a really great piece of advice.
Yeah, I love that so much. Sometimes it's the simplest little comments that make the biggest lasting impression. Tiana, for people who are interested in working with you, either bringing you in with a speaker, which let me be the advocate. She is a phenomenal keynote speaker. She held the attention of thousands of people. She brought great data, insights, perspectives. And so I can't recommend her enough. But for people who want to connect with you, to hire you or work with you, what's the best way for them to connect?
Yes, super, super easy. You can go to tianasanchez.com. That's Sanchez with a Z. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn, same name. Love to connect with you there. I post a lot of stuff on there as well. I do have Instagram handle and YouTube. But my best spot is probably LinkedIn. That's my jam. That's where I'm at most of the time. And would love to connect with you. Also get the new book in your hands coming up in the next month.
Well, keep us posted on that. And then we can promote that in our newsletter as well. And we will, as always, my friends, we will put all of her contact information in the show notes. I highly recommend you connect with her, and I highly recommend you hire her. Tiana Sanchez, thank you so much for coming on the show and saying yes. We appreciate you.
Thank you. This was a blast. I really appreciate it, Sarah. Thank you.
Our guest this week has been Tiana Sanchez, and I was so thrilled to be in conversation with her. Obviously, I love that she was a hot dogger. And I took other stuff, but that tickled me so much at the top of our conversation. I love that definition of civility that she shared, of it being a commitment to each other, right? Like, what does that look like? And so, as always, we want to hear from you. What resonated for you? Be sure to send us an email at podcast@sarahnollwilson.com, where I read and respond to all messages that we receive there. And if you've been listening for a while or a new time listener and you want to support the show, 2 very simple but powerful ways that you can help support the show. The first is rate, review, and subscribe to the show on your preferred podcast platform. This helps us to increase exposure, to get on list, and to be able to continue to have great conversations like we did. The other way you can support us is, if you got a little bit of money hanging around and you want to support the team that makes this show possible, consider becoming a patron. You can go to patreon.com/conversations on conversations, where your financial contribution goes to support the team that makes this show possible. You also get early access to episodes that are ad-free, and you get limited edition podcast swag from the show. So what's not to love about that? Speaking of the team, let's give them some love. So our producer, Nick Wilson, our sound editor, Drew Knoll, our transcriptionist, Becky Reinert, our marketing consultant, Jessica Burge, and the rest of the Snowcoat crew. Thank you. And a big thank you to Tiana Sanchez for saying yes and bringing her insights with us today. Thank you all so much for listening, for showing up. And that, my friends, wraps another episode of Conversations on Conversations. Remember, when we can change the conversations we have with ourselves and others, we can change the world. So please be sure to rest, rehydrate, and we'll see you again soon.